Now we're pushing down into the South after this Creek Civil War. And then you're going to have the Battle of Fort Mims, which we'll win that. We caught them off guard. They left the gate open. Then you have the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, and then Battle of Fort Jackson, 1715. After that battle, we'll leave Georgia going to Florida. That'll begin what is known as the Seminole Wars, 1816. Now, this is me, because I'm just talking, I'm not an armchair scholar. This is me in Florida at the Seminole Reservation, 1 deep. Now, let's go into it. Now, they wanted to get down inside this area. We almost done too, y'all. We finna run through there. So, in accordance with the settled colonial mentality Jackson era, because Andrew Jackson is the one who wanted to raid it. The Rothschilds didn't want to put the money up. They were more focused on the industrial industry that was going on in the upper colonies. But they saw the value in the agriculture as it would move from beaver pelts to deerskins to agriculture. The South was way more richer because, as we know, that's where the black belt, that's where the best soil in the world is at. And, you know, we have abundance of it, you know, of resources coming out of the ground. So they saw the value in this. So when the U.S. was created, that Constitution, they get everything together, boom, the Cherokee is created. This 5 civilized tribe is created. And they're basically going to be a governmental body over these nations that are in these geographical areas that the United States is going to set out. Boom. So now let's walk through it. Now, you had these other people sign treaties. They said the Seminole signed treaties. Well, at that time, there were people who were on the side of the Seminoles and saying that these treaties were fraudulent. Now, we're going to go here. This stands for a strategy. The first and foremost aim to eliminate them from the land. Deceit, cohesion, and already seen were persuasive. Now, the U.S. House of Representatives, Horace Everett of Vermont, addressing the opening of the Seminole War, simply stating the obvious when he replied in the negative to his self-possession, his quarrel. An initial reason, quite telling, was the fact that our treaties, or as they say, white man's treaties, made in our language, translated by our interpreters, and by them Seminoles, imperfectly understood, imperfectly remembered. Another primary objection, according to Everett, opponent of the Jackson Indian removal, was unquestionable fact that what Euro-Americans or our own historians, we tell the story because these circumstances insisted in all question, doubt, power. Now, what are they speaking about? Because he's going to come back and say it's influential, not quite dated historical history of the Second Seminole War. They're going to say Mahone documented evidence, among other sources, that the private diaries of Major Ethan Allen Hitchcock, the Army leading expert on Indian policy, guess what he's going to say? Hitchcock was quite adamant in charging that the Jackson administration was dishonest in dealing with the Seminole Indians. So the Treaty of Payne Landing that people talk about the Seminole sign, Seminole never signed the treaty. We was going to bang it out. What are we doing? We're going to go through that. So he said this unusual arrangement, Commissioner James Gasson bypassed the nearby Indian agent. So what happened? This is the guy Hitchcock again. He was convinced that Gasson had resorted to bribery, okay, to acquire the necessary signatures and the supposed consent of the Seminoles. This allegation stems from first-hand account by Army Captain Charles Thurston. This whole issue was fraudulent, and this is government calling it out, but they're going to bypass it because then they're going to bring them into the play on the money play. But anyway, in Washington, D.C., he never could have got the treaty through if he had not bribed the Negro interpreter. So when we hear people like Abraham and these famous Indians, these are traitors. Why? Because they used Abraham for $200 to sign the treaty. I didn't say it. This is what they're going to say. So check it out. Right here, a black interpreter named Abraham purposely misrepresented the stipulations in such manner to leave the chiefs under the impression that they were, and they have the ultimate decision on whether to move to the west. This was simple, unquestionable truth. Now, Hitchcock, he also supported the similar version of the event and maintained that the treaty stipulations were falsely represented to them, all right? And the payment of $200 to Abraham. So they done gave him $200 and he done came here and spoke for everybody. So let's walk. Why am I qualified to speak on this conversation? Because William Billy Osceola is my 8th ancestor. This is my genealogy right here. This is me at his burial site. Now, when I went there, this is in South Carolina, had to cross the bridge, everything, left out of Charleston. All right, now let's talk about it. Now, we rocking. So, 1816, we done went through the Second Seminole War, Treaty Payne, all of this, right? Now, we're going to bounce over. This is a story that a lot of people don't hear about. Now, when America won the war in the Civil War, you had something called the Seminole Scouts. They contacted the people who defeated them, who defeated over 8 U.S. generals. That's why when Brother Rich read earlier, this is the most money America ever put in the war. They couldn't do nothing with us. And I'm going to show how we built the most powerful army in the world, and today they're still the most powerful, and it's because of us. You're witnesses, the Seminole Indian Scouts. What happened?
The 10th Cavalry, United States Buffalo Soldiers, we went there and we built the city. We built the roads, we built the buildings, we built all the structures there. And then we did so well, they said, well, let's send them over to Sequoia. So we went over to Sequoia. We built Sequoia. The next thing you know, we're the first national park range. We built national parks from Maine to California. That's good enough for you?
Little known history.
This would be the last conflict right here. Every Native American that's on reservations in the West fought against the Buffalo Soldiers, and after that war, they were put on these reservations. Now, what's important, when we spoke about the United States Colored Troops, the Third Seminole War, you speak about Billy Bowlegs. Billy Bowlegs, they have pictures going around of him being this mongoloid looking guy. He don't look like us. But what's not known about Billy Bowleg, they tried to say Billy Bowleg ended up passing away May 1859. Now we know the Seminole War was over 1858, but that's not true. Why we know it's not true? Because Billy Bowleg was one of the principal chiefs of the 5 civilized tribes who supported the Union in the Civil War. In May 1862, he commissioned captain of Company A, 1st Indian Regiment. He was prominent in the raids fighting in Kansas and in Indian Territory, taking a credible part in the actions. He died March 10, 1864. That was after the proclamation. So this Usct that we see right here fighting, that made it to Kansas when they tried to sneak us in Oklahoma, and we ended up defeating the last one. Well, Billy Bowleg fought in this. He fought for the Kansas infantry. These are these people. So he looked like us. That picture that they showing is a lot. His name, matter of fact, is not even Billy Bowleg. But we'll go into that. I'm almost done. So as we see here, most Seminole sided with the Confederates, and then the refugees fled to Kansas, such as Billy Bowleg. Now, after the Dawes Act, you had the Curtis Act, and that dissolved the Seminole government and divided its territory amongst 3,000 enrolled tribal members. So they're going to break up the Seminoles as we know it. Now, this is where it come into play. These people like this are being called Seminoles. We almost done. Where did this come from? The government, the military force of Canada and the United States have made plain Indian culture groups, archetype in literature and arts for Native Americans everywhere. That's why if we said they'll laugh at us, because the institutions have made these people. Now, who are these? Again, we speaking on the Buffalo Soldiers. The Buffalo Soldiers are going to fight in the Spanish-American War in the Philippines. Well, the Philippines was brought over to the Americas after the war. They were called Little Brown Brothers. This was a slang used by Filipinos during the period of colonial rule following the Treaty of Paris. Now, Mexicans and Hispanics call themselves Brown Brothers, or being called, they're not even understanding, what this means. This is Little Brown Brothers St. Louis Blues. This is the World Fair 1904. These are staged villages put up. So these people are here. Now we have Plain Indian, Plain Filipino, Native Americans, Filipino interaction at Carlisle in Indian school. So we're going to see these people. They put out, I think it was $5 million to civilize these people for 50 years. Now right here, for many years, World Fairs held in the United States featured recreated Native American villages where customers could pay to see inhabitants go through their daily lives. Okay, this Chicago World Fair. The Seminole Village, 1939-1940 fair, was smaller. So, Brother Rich, when you ask, when we pull up the Seminole pictures, why we don't see us? Because they're going to show us the pictures that came from this World Fair in these villages that was created. Right here, this is a postcard. Chicago, Illinois, Seminole Indian Village, Chicago World Fair. Again, these are the pictures that are coming up. Now, Where did this Seminole come from? A guy named Stanley Smith. We almost done. He came from Florida in 43. He was a missionary that arrived to them. Big Cypress Reservation, the people. Now, in 1934, something took place called the Reorganization Act, where they basically went from a traditional bloodline chief to now basically like in the U.S. government, where you had to do election. So again, another Seminole village. This right here is a recent picture. They put it in black and white, but this guy's alligator wrestling. Well, the oldest alligator wrestling is at St. Augustine Alligator Zoo Park, located a few miles from St. Augustine, we've been talking about today. And right here, when we come over here to the Library of Congress, we see this guy wrestling alligator at St. Augustine Farm. So everything we did, they tried to get them to do. This is a much older picture. They made the other picture black and white of the other guy. Now, this was the New Deal, June 18, 1934, they did the Reorganization Act. So now you have to be voted in. So the first principal chief, look, Billy Osceola, he was the first elected Seminole chief. So they started over. When they started over, this is the first elected. And he came through a missionary guy from Oklahoma, a YT man named Stanley Smith. Now, this is very important because he go the first elected principal chief for the Cherokee after the Reorganization Act. He first elected for the Seminole. He first elected for the Cherokee.